The billionaire dug a secret hole. Then the maid's toddler saw what he hid. The Hargrove estate sat at the top of Beacon Hill like a crown no one wanted to wear anymore. It had 12 bedrooms, a tennis court with cracked clay, a wine cellar that no longer saw company, and grounds so vast that a man could walk them for an hour and never see the same rosebush twice. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where happiness lived. From the inside, Ethan Hargrove knew better. At 33, Ethan had more money than 3 generations of his family could spend. He had built his first software company at 19, sold it at 24, launched a second, then a third, and by 28, Forbes had called him the quiet titan of Silicon Valley. The magazines loved his story, the boy from modest Ohio roots who had coded his way to $500 million. They photographed him in Italian suits, in front of glass-faced buildings, shaking hands with senators. They never photographed him at 2 a.m, sitting alone in his kitchen with a glass of water he forgot to drink, staring at the wall. He did not sleep well. He had not slept well in 3 years. Not since the night his younger brother, Daniel, had died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway in November. Daniel had been 29. He had been funny and loud and impossibly alive. He had called Ethan every Sunday morning, usually while making pancakes, always laughing about something. The Sunday calls stopped, and something in Ethan stopped with them. The grief counselor his assistant had booked told him to process and release. The books on his nightstand told him to sit with the pain. His board of directors told him, gently, to take some time. None of it helped. So Ethan Hargrove, who solved problems for a living, decided to solve this one the only way that had ever truly worked for him. He did something with his hands. It started on a Thursday afternoon in early April when the sky was the color of old pewter and the air smelled of thawing ground. He walked to the far southeast corner of the estate, past the old oak that Daniel used to climb when they were boys visiting their grandparents. This had been their grandparents' property once, before it passed to him through a tangle of inheritance and memory, and he picked up a shovel that was leaning against the potting shed. He began to dig. He did not have a plan. That was the strange part because Ethan always had a plan. He had flowcharts for his flowcharts. But on this particular Thursday, he just dug. The shovel bit into the cold earth, and he pushed down with the heel of his boot, and he lifted, and he threw, and he dug again. His shoulders ached. His palms blistered under his leather gloves. He kept going. An hour passed, then 2. The hole grew. By the time the light began to go and the grounds crew had finished for the day and gone home, the hole was roughly 4 feet wide and perhaps 3 feet deep. Ethan stood in it, his dress trousers destroyed, his white shirt soaked through with sweat, and he looked up at the darkening sky, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt tired, real tired, the good kind, the kind that comes from using your body until it has nothing left to argue about. He went inside. He slept. He came back the next day. It became his ritual, his secret, the one thing about his life that he did not schedule or optimize or explain to anyone. Every evening after the workday ended and the staff had gone home, Ethan Hargrove went to his hole in the southeast corner of the estate and he dug. He was not sure what he was building. He told himself, when he thought about it at all, that it would be a garden. A memorial garden for Daniel, maybe. Something with the jasmine Daniel had always loved, something quiet and intentional and permanent. But really, if he was being honest with himself in the dark, which was the only time a man like Ethan was truly honest, he was digging because the earth didn't flinch. The earth just accepted whatever you gave it. The earth did not need him to be fine. He hired no one to help. He told no one it existed. Maria, his housekeeper of 6 years, had noticed the dirt on his clothes. Of course, Maria noticed everything, but she was a woman of extraordinary discretion, and she simply added his work clothes to the laundry rotation without comment. If she wondered, she kept it to herself. What Ethan did not know, on that first Thursday in April, was that Maria's life had recently and dramatically changed. 3 weeks earlier, her daughter, Rosa, her child from a brief marriage that had dissolved when Rosa was barely a year old, had come to live with Maria on the estate. Rosa was 3 years old. She had big dark eyes and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes and absolutely no understanding of the concept of private property, or, for that matter, of any boundary whatsoever. Rosa changed everything. She just didn't know it yet. And neither did Ethan. The hole in the southeast corner of the estate was 6 feet across and 4 feet deep by the end of April. Ethan had begun lining parts of it with flat stones he found along the creek bed at the property's edge. He had ordered jasmine bulbs online, paying for overnight shipping without a second thought. He had bought a book about garden design and then felt embarrassed by the purchase and hidden it in his desk drawer. He was building something. He was not ready to say what it was. The last Saturday of April arrived cool and bright. The grounds crew had the weekend off. Maria was cleaning the east wing. Ethan was in his home office on a call with his Tokyo partners, pacing the way he always did when he was bored by logistics, when he looked out the window and saw something that stopped him mid-sentence. A small figure in a red raincoat was toddling, with great purpose and terrible coordination, directly toward the southeast corner of the estate. "I'll call you back," he said, and hung up before the translator had even finished the sentence. Ethan was out the back door in under a minute, moving faster than a man in dress socks probably should across damp grass, and he arrived at the southeast corner to find Rosa Delgado Fuentes standing at the edge of his hole, peering into it with a solemn, scientific expression of a person conducting a very important inspection. She was wearing the red raincoat over what appeared to be pajamas with frogs on them. Her dark hair was in 2 uneven pigtails that someone, presumably Maria, in a hurry, had tied with yellow ribbons. One ribbon was already partially undone. She was holding, for reasons Ethan could not begin to guess, a single plastic dinosaur in her left hand. She looked up at him when he arrived. She did not appear startled. She appeared, if anything, mildly pleased to have company. "Big hole," she announced. Ethan stopped at the other side of the hole and stared at her. He was not accustomed to small children. He did not have siblings with children. His friends, the ones who remained anyway, the ones who hadn't drifted away in the fog years of grief, did not have children yet. He had, in the last 3 years, spoken to children a grand total of approximately 4 times, and each time it had felt like communicating across a vast cultural divide. "Yes," he said carefully. "It is a big hole." Rosa nodded as though he had confirmed a suspicion she had long held. She crouched down at the edge of the hole, causing Ethan's heart to seize momentarily, and peered in more closely. "What's in there?" "Nothing yet," he said. "I'm going to put a garden in it." She considered this. Does a garden go in a hole? It was, he had to admit, a fair question. "This kind does," he said. "It's a sunken garden. The walls help protect the plants from the wind." Rosa seemed to accept this reasoning. She looked at the stones he had begun laying along the edges. She pointed at one with her dinosaur. "Pretty rock." "It's from the creek," he said. "Oh." She looked at him with sudden, piercing seriousness. "Do you got a dinosaur?" "I don't," he admitted. She held hers out toward him across the hole. It was a small green triceratops, its paint worn away in places from much handling. "You can borrow Kevin," she said. Something happened in Ethan's chest that he was not prepared for. A small, strange warmth, like a match being struck in a very dark room. He was quiet for a moment. "Kevin," he repeated. "He likes holes," Rosa explained seriously. "He goes in holes. He's exploring." Ethan almost smiled. It was the closest he had come in a long time. He crouched down so he was more at her level, which put him in an undignified position, but somehow he did not mind. "Maybe Kevin should wait up here," he said gently. "The hole is a little deep for 3-year-olds. Rosa looked at him with eyes that suggested she was not convinced 3-year-olds faced any particular limitations, but she did not protest. She set Kevin down on the grass beside her and sat down cross-legged instead, which was apparently her response to being told she should not jump into holes. She would simply stay nearby and observe. Ethan should have sent her inside. He should have found Maria, handed this small person over, returned his phone call and his Tokyo partners and his scheduled, optimized, Sarah-managed life. That was what a sensible person would have done. Instead, he picked up his shovel. He worked quietly for a while as the April sun moved through the clouds and the birds carried on their business in the old oak. Rosa watched him with the attentive patience of someone watching a very good television program. Occasionally, she offered commentary. "Dirt," she observed. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "More dirt." "Also yes." "Why?" He paused, resting his forearm on the shovel handle, and looked at her. She was watching him with those serious dark eyes. Kevin the Triceratops nestled in her lap, her unraveled yellow ribbon floating in the breeze. She had asked the question with the genuine curiosity of someone who truly wanted to know, not with the social reflexive why of a child testing boundaries. She actually wanted an answer. He thought about saying it was just for the garden. He thought about deflecting, redirecting, doing what he always did when the question was too close to something real. "My brother used to love this spot," he said instead, and was surprised to hear his own voice say it. "He used to climb that tree when we were boys." He nodded toward the old oak. "He died 3 years ago. And I miss him. So I'm building something here." He paused. "So I don't forget." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up Kevin, stood up, and walked carefully around the edge of the hole to his side. She stood next to him and looked at the oak tree. Then she held Kevin out again. "Kevin can help," she said. Ethan looked at the small green dinosaur extended toward him on a small brown palm, and this time, he did not almost smile. He actually smiled. It broke over his face like something long frozen finally cracking open in the spring. It hurt a little, the way feeling does after numbness. But it was real. He took Kevin. He held the small plastic dinosaur in his large hand, and he looked at this 3-year-old girl standing beside him in frog pajamas and a red raincoat, and something in him, something that had been sealed shut for 3 years, something he had hired people to help him open and read books to try to understand, and drunk enough expensive whiskey attempting to dissolve. Something shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. When Maria came around the corner of the hedge 5 minutes later, moving with the brisk, purposeful energy of a woman who has just realized she has lost track of her toddler, she found an extremely powerful and famously private billionaire crouched beside her daughter in the dirt, holding a plastic dinosaur, explaining the difference between topsoil and clay with perfect seriousness, while Rosa listened with her chin propped in her muddy hands and her yellow ribbon completely, finally, fully, undone. Maria stopped at a respectful distance. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She did not interrupt. Later that night, after Rosa was bathed and fed and asleep with Kevin tucked under her arm, Maria knocked on the door of Ethan's study. "I'm sorry about Rosa," she said. "She escaped. She is very fast." "She found my project," Ethan said. He was sitting at his desk, the garden design book open in front of him, no longer hidden in the drawer. "She named my dinosaur Kevin." Maria looked at the small plastic triceratops sitting on top of Ethan's keyboard. "Ah," she said. "Yes. That is Kevin." There was a pause. "Mr. Hargrove," Maria said carefully, "Rosa does not understand that some places are private. I will speak to her." "Please don't," Ethan said. He was quiet for a moment. "The jasmine bulbs arrive Tuesday. I could use someone to help me decide where they go." He looked up. "If she's interested." Maria looked at him for a long moment. In 6 years, she had learned to read the spaces around Ethan Hargrove's words, and what she read in those spaces now made her heart clench with something soft and grateful and very close to hope. "She will be very interested," Maria said quietly. "She is always interested in everything." Ethan nodded and turned back to his book. But the corner of his mouth was still faintly curved, and Maria noticed, as she closed the study door softly behind her, that for the first time in years, the light in his study was still on at 10 o'clock, not because he was working, but because he was reading. May arrived and brought with it warm afternoons and the smell of blooming things, and an entirely new routine at the Hargrove estate that nobody had planned and everyone quietly treasured. At 4:30 every weekday afternoon, when Rosa woke from her nap, she would find her red raincoat and her rubber boots, a gift that had appeared one morning on the back porch without explanation, sized exactly right, bright yellow with small frogs on them, and she would make her way with tremendous enthusiasm and terrible navigational consistency toward the southeast corner of the estate. Ethan had begun finishing his calls by 4:15. He had built her a small wooden step stool so she could see over the stone lip of the sunken garden without falling in. He had sectioned off a small raised bed beside the main garden and filled it with easy-grow soil and cheerful, forgiving flowers, marigolds, zinnias, nasturtiums, and declared it her section. He had given her a child-sized trowel with a red handle, which she treated with the reverence due a sacred object. "My garden," she announced on the first day she received it, crouching over the soil bed and pressing Kevin's nose gently against it, as though introducing him. "Your garden," Ethan agreed. What he had not anticipated, what no risk assessment or strategic plan or board presentation could have prepared him for, was how much he would learn from her. Not about gardening, though she did have opinions about where flowers should go that were colorful, if not always practical. About something else. Something larger. Rosa had no tolerance for rushing. If a worm appeared in the soil, everything stopped. The worm was examined, discussed, named, invariably something either regal, Sir Wiggins, or domestic, Bob, relocated with great ceremony to what Rosa deemed a superior location, and given a formal farewell. If a butterfly landed nearby, the trowel went down. If the clouds made an interesting shape, it was identified and debated until consensus was reached. She moved through the world as though every single thing in it was worth stopping for. Ethan, who had structured his entire adult life around never stopping, found himself stopping. He found himself crouching over worms and agreeing that Sir Wiggins did seem like a dignified name. He found himself studying cloud formations through the eyes of a 3-year-old and discovering that the cloud did, actually, look quite a lot like a whale. "Uncle Ethan," she said one afternoon in the second week of May. He looked up from the stone border he was resetting. She had not asked permission to call him that. She had not asked permission to abbreviate Mr. Hargrove, or to decide that they were in a family-adjacent relationship. She had simply arrived one day at the conclusion that he was Uncle Ethan and implemented it without ceremony or negotiation, the way children implement all their most important decisions. He had not corrected her. He had found, to his own considerable surprise, that he did not want to. "Do plants miss people?" she asked. He set down the stone he was holding. She was crouching over her marigold bed, touching the first bud that had begun to push through the soil with one very careful fingertip. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Like, if I go to Grammy's house for a week, do they miss me?" She looked up. "Will they be sad?" He thought about it seriously because Rosa had an instinct for questions that deserved to be taken seriously. "I think they might notice," he said finally. "Plants respond to the people who tend them. There's science about it. They do better when someone pays attention to them." Rosa absorbed this. She looked at the marigold bud with a new expression, something between affection and responsibility. "I'll talk to them before I go," she decided. "So they know I'm coming back." Ethan watched her, and the matchlit warmth in his chest that had first appeared at the edge of the hole had by now grown into something steadier. Something that wanted to be called what it was. He missed Daniel every day. He missed him the way you miss a specific light in a room, not just the brightness but the particular quality of it, the way it fell, the way things looked different in it. He missed Daniel's Sunday morning calls and his terrible jokes and his habit of quoting movies at completely inappropriate moments. He missed the version of himself that existed when Daniel was alive, lighter, somehow, easier at his own borders. But here, in this corner of the estate with its emerging sunken garden and its bed of cheerful flowers and its population of ceremonially named worms, Ethan was becoming aware that grief was not, perhaps, only what it took away. Grief was also, in some hard-to-articulate way, an opening. A hole, perhaps. And what grew in a hole depended entirely on what you were willing to put in it. One afternoon in mid-May, he sat down on the grass beside Rosa's flower bed while she watered it with a small green watering can, and he told her about Daniel. Not all of it, not the accident or the hospital or the particular silence of the night his phone rang and his life changed. She was 3, and 3-year-olds should not carry that weight. But the good parts. Daniel climbing the old oak. Daniel making pancakes and calling on Sunday mornings. Daniel's ridiculous impression of a British news anchor that was never accurate, but was always funny. Rosa listened. She watered her marigolds. She nodded at appropriate moments. When he finished, she was quiet for a little while. Then, was Daniel nice? Very nice, Ethan said. As nice as Kevin? He looked at the plastic triceratops, which now lived in a small clay pot on the stone edge of the sunken garden, because Rosa had decided Kevin needed a home of his own. About as nice as Kevin, he said. Rosa seemed satisfied. She gave the marigolds one more pass with the watering can. He would like this garden, she announced. Ethan looked at the jasmine beginning to climb the stone wall he had built, at the lavender and the rosemary and the small Japanese maple he had planted in the center, like a quiet heart. He looked at the flat creek stones, warm in the afternoon sun. He looked at Kevin in his clay pot. Yeah, he said. He would have liked it a lot. The jasmine opened its first flowers on a Thursday, exactly 4 weeks after Ethan had first picked up the shovel. He didn't notice until Rosa grabbed his hand and dragged him over to see. Smell, she commanded. He bent down and breathed in the jasmine. It smelled exactly like Daniel's apartment had always smelled, because Daniel had kept jasmine on his windowsill, and the memory hit Ethan so hard and so unexpectedly that he had to sit down on the grass right there, and for a moment he couldn't say anything at all. Rosa, misreading his silence, crouched beside him with her small hands on his arm. Is it a good smell or a bad smell? She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. The best smell, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. The absolute best. She patted his arm with considerable authority. Good, she said. I helped plant that one. That's mine. He covered her small hand with his large one. He did not say anything. He did not have to. They sat together in the May sunshine, the man who had everything and the child who had nothing to give but her company and her plastic dinosaur and her absolute, unconditional presence, and the garden grew around them like it had always been waiting for exactly this. Maria Delgado had come to the United States from Guatemala 17 years ago with $80 in her pocket, a 9th-grade education, and a stubbornness that her mother had always called a character flaw and that Maria had always suspected was actually her finest quality. She had cleaned hotels and offices and wealthy people's houses. She had learned English from television and from the public library's free language classes on Tuesday evenings. She had gotten her GED, then a certificate in household management, and she had slowly and steadily built a life that was modest in square footage and vast in dignity. She had worked for the Hargroves for 6 years. She had come to work for the elder Hargroves first, Ethan's grandparents, and when they passed and the estate transferred to Ethan, he had asked her to stay, offering a salary that she knew was above market rate and a small apartment in the guest house that had changed her life in ways she still felt grateful for every morning when she made coffee and looked out the window at the gardens. She had watched Ethan Hargrove grieve for 3 years. She had watched the light go out of him slowly and steadily, like a room that keeps losing bulbs one by one. She had watched him stop eating properly and start working until midnight and smile at his staff with a smile that reached only as far as his lips. She had seen the grief counselor come and go. She had seen the books accumulate on his nightstand. She had seen the whiskey bottles that she removed without comment and replaced with good sparkling water, and she had never, not once, said a word about any of it because it was not her place and because some pain is too private to name. But she had worried. in the particular deep-rooted way that comes from caring about someone you are technically employed by but actually have come to love, in the complicated way you love people who are part of your daily landscape, the way you love the tree outside your window or the coffee shop on the corner. Not dramatically, not confessionally, but absolutely, as a fundamental part of the world as you know it. When Rosa had come to live with her, Maria had been terrified. She loved her daughter without reservation and had been sending money to Rosa's grandmother in Guatemala for 3 years to help raise her, and she had visited 3 times a year, each visit a joy and a heartbreak in equal measure. But having Rosa here, in the United States, in the guest house apartment, with her energy and her noise and her absolute disregard for anything as limiting as indoor voice guidelines, Maria had been certain this would complicate her work, strain her relationship with Mr. Hargrove, and make everything harder. Instead, something impossible had happened. Maria kept a small journal. She had kept it for years, not a diary exactly, more a series of observations, the way someone who has trained themselves to notice things develops a habit of writing them down before they float away. In early May, she began to fill it with things she saw from windows. May 4th, Rosa found the hole. Mr. H let her stay. She gave him Kevin. He smiled. I have not seen him smile in a very long time. May 9th. They were out there for 2 hours today. She named a worm Sir Wiggins. He helped her move it to the rosebush. He looked about 40 years younger crouching over that worm. May 14th. She called him Uncle Ethan. He didn't correct her. He looked at her for a moment first, and then he didn't correct her. May 21st. He told her about Daniel today. I could not hear what he said, but I watched her put her hand on his arm when he went quiet for a moment, and that child, my 3-year-old daughter, who still sometimes calls spaghetti, knew exactly what to do. There were more entries. There were many more. Through the windows of the estate, through the kitchen window while she prepared lunch, and the laundry room window while she folded linens, and the east wing window while she dusted the shelves, Maria had assembled a picture. Not a complete one, because you can't see everything from windows, but enough. Enough to understand what was happening in the southeast corner of the estate. Ethan Hargrove was coming back. She would not have said it that way to him. She would not have said it at all. Some things between people who care about each other are better left in the language of windows and journals and small hands patting large forms. But she felt it, the way you feel weather change before it rains, a quality of the air shifting. In late May, Ethan asked her to sit down with him for a moment when she brought his morning coffee. This was unusual. He always had his morning coffee while already in motion, already reviewing something or preparing for something or solving something. She sat. I need to talk to you about Rosa, he said. Maria felt the familiar cold clench of a working mother's oldest fear, that her child's presence had been too much, had overstayed whatever unspoken welcome had been extended, that the impossible thing happening in the southeast corner was about to be gently but professionally ended. Of course, she said carefully. If she has been in the way. No, Ethan said. He looked down at his coffee. He had the look of a man choosing words very carefully, which was unusual for someone who normally wielded words with the efficient precision of a tool. Quite the opposite. He paused. I'd like to set up a college fund for her, he said. If you'll allow it. A real one. I have the lawyers for it. It would be structured so that it's entirely in her name, yours to manage, nothing conditional. He looked up. You've been with this family for 6 years. You took care of my grandparents. You take care of this house. I should have done something like this a long time ago, and the fact that I didn't, he stopped. Rosa is why I thought of it. But it's about you too. Both of you. Maria looked at him across the morning light. She had not cried in front of an employer in 17 years of housekeeping in America. She had not cried in front of anyone in quite some time, because crying was a thing she did privately, in her apartment, after hard days, when the distance between Guatemala and Massachusetts felt particularly vast. She cried now. Just for a moment, quietly, looking away toward the window. She brought herself back quickly. She was a woman of considerable self-possession, and when she looked at Ethan again, she saw that he was looking somewhere else with great deliberateness, giving her the privacy of not being watched. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Rosa wants the jasmine to have a name," he said, moving on with the practiced kindness of a man who understands that the best way to honor emotion is sometimes to simply continue. "She's decided it should be Daniel." Maria pressed her hands together in her lap. "That seems right," she said softly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It does." He picked up his coffee. She picked up her composure. They sat together for a moment in the morning light, the billionaire and the housekeeper, held in place by the particular tenderness of people who have seen each other through hard things and come out the other side into something that did not have a ready name, but felt very much like grace. The dedication of the garden happened on the first Saturday of June, and Ethan had not planned to call it a dedication. He had not planned most of what that day became. It started simply. The garden was finished. The sunken walls were complete, lined with flat creek stones that caught the morning light. The jasmine, Daniel, climbed the south wall in extravagant white-flowering abundance. The lavender hummed with bees. The Japanese maple stood at the center, its leaves the color of a sunset caught and held still. Rosa's marigolds and zinnias blazed in the raised bed beside the main garden in colors so cheerful they seemed almost aggressive. Kevin the Triceratops surveyed it all from his clay pot with the serene authority of a creature who has been told he is in charge and sees no reason to doubt it. Maria had made food. She always made food for things that mattered, and there was a blanket spread on the grass beside the garden and lemonade in a pitcher that Rosa had helped squeeze, approximately 40% of which had actually made it into the pitcher versus her face and the kitchen counter, and there were sandwiches cut into triangles because Rosa believed triangles tasted better, which was a scientific position Ethan had found himself unable to argue with. Just the three of them. Ethan had not thought about inviting anyone else. This had not been a thing that was meant to have an audience. They sat on the blanket. The June sun was warm without being heavy. A mockingbird in the old oak ran through its full repertoire. Rosa ate 3 triangle sandwiches and then announced that Kevin needed a sandwich too, and Ethan broke off a small piece of crust and placed it in the clay pot beside Kevin with the full dignity the moment seemed to require. "Okay," Rosa said, settling herself beside Ethan on the blanket with the air of someone preparing to conduct important proceedings. "Say something." He looked at her.
"About what?"
"About the garden," she said. "You say something. Then I say something. Then Mama says something." "Like a speech?" he asked. She considered this. "Like when you love something," she said. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Around him the garden waited, alive and present, and full of the particular patience of growing things. Somewhere in the lavender, a bee made its unhurried rounds. The jasmine moved in the faint breeze. "Daniel," he said finally, not to anyone in particular, just to the garden and the day and the space where his brother used to be, "would have made fun of me for this. He would have taken a picture on his phone and sent it to every person we know with some ridiculous caption. And then he would have sat down right here and eaten all the sandwiches and told me it was the best thing I'd ever built."
He paused.
He would have been right. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I built this because I was drowning and I needed to do something with my hands. I didn't know it was going to turn into this. I didn't know," he glanced at Rosa. She was watching him with her chin on her knees. "I didn't know I was going to find a 3-year-old in a red raincoat on my property who would give me a dinosaur and tell me her name was Kevin, and somehow that would be exactly what I needed." He said it lightly, but his voice did the thing at the end where it got rough around the edges. Rosa did not treat this as something that required fixing. She simply leaned against his arm, the way she had begun to do without asking or announcing, just as a matter of gravity, as though she naturally orbited in his direction. "My turn," she said. "Your turn," he agreed. Rosa sat up straight in the way she did when something was official. She looked at the garden. She took a deep breath. "I love the flowers," she said. "And I love Kevin. And I love Sir Wiggins, even though he moved away." She thought for a moment. And I love Uncle Ethan. She looked at him sidelong, with the expression of someone checking whether this is acceptable. He looked back at her steadily, and she apparently decided it was, because she continued, "And I think Daniel would like it here. Because I like it here." And she paused, working something out. And when you really like a place, it means the people you love can feel it, even from far away. There was a silence. Maria, sitting across the blanket, had stopped pretending to look at her lemonade. Ethan looked at this child, this 3-year-old girl in her yellow ribbon pigtails and her frog print shirt and her rubber boots that she had insisted on wearing despite the warm weather because she felt boots were appropriate for garden occasions, and he thought about what it meant to be saved by something small. Not by a grand gesture or a revelation or a moment of blinding clarity. By a plastic dinosaur extended across a hole. By a child sitting cross-legged in the dirt. By questions asked without embarrassment about whether plants miss people. By the steadfast, uncomplicated, magnificent insistence of a 3-year-old on the importance of being present. He had spent 3 years trying to build walls around his grief, to manage it, to outwork it, to outthink it. And it had been a child who had simply walked into it, sat down, and shown him that the hole wasn't something to be filled or sealed. It was something to grow in. "My turn," Maria said softly. They looked at her. Maria Delgado had 17 years of dignified restraint in this country. She had 17 years of being careful, of being professional, of keeping the particular tenderness of her observations locked in a small journal where it was safe. She looked at Ethan Hargrove and then at her daughter, and she decided, on this particular June Saturday, to set it down. 6 years ago, I came to work for this family, she said. I have cleaned this house in good times and in hard times. I have watched this man, she nodded at Ethan, go very far into the dark. And I have hoped, every day, for the light to come back. She looked at Rosa, who was listening with a serious attention she gave to all important things. I did not know, she said, that the light would be you. Rosa absorbed this with great gravity. Then, I'm the light? You are, Maria said. Rosa thought about this. She picked up Kevin. She looked at him, then at the garden, then at Ethan, with the contemplative expression of someone in whom a large truth is finding its proper place. Kevin's the light too, she decided generously. We're both the light. Ethan laughed. It came out of him like something long held underwater, finally breaking the surface, full and real, and a little ragged at the edges and completely, totally genuine. Rosa looked delighted by this, the way children are always delighted by causing an adult to truly laugh, and she giggled, and Maria laughed too, and the mockingbird in the old oak kept singing, as if accompanying something that deserved a song. In the weeks that followed, the garden became what gardens always become when they are tended with intention and love, a living thing with its own rhythm, its own daily offerings, its own insistence on continuing. The jasmine named Daniel bloomed extravagantly all through June. Rosa's marigolds required a second staking because they grew taller than anyone expected. Ethan subscribed to 3 gardening newsletters, which his assistant noted with great professional restraint. Maria began making her morning coffee in a chair she had moved to the window that looked toward the southeast corner. On Sundays, Ethan called people he had let drift. Not everyone, some distances had become their own kind of answer. But some. He called his college roommate in Portland. He called his mother in Columbus, who burst into happy tears when he told her about the garden, because she had always known something about Ethan and growing things that he had needed time to find for himself. He called Daniel's closest friend, Marco, and they talked for 2 hours about Daniel and cried a little and laughed more, and at the end Marco said, he would have really liked that you did this, and Ethan said, yeah, I know, and meant it without the ache being the only thing. He was not fixed. He would carry Daniel forever, which was the right thing, the human thing, the only true response to loving someone who is no longer there. But he was no longer only carrying it. He was also tending things. He was also present. He was also, in the simplest and most essential sense of the word, alive. On the last day of June, Rosa fell asleep in the garden. It happened the way it always happened with her, gradually, and then all at once, mid-sentence being, "Uncle Ethan, do you think Kevin would like a—" And then nothing, her head on her arms on the grass, her yellow ribbon pigtails spread around her, completely and entirely asleep in the way only children can sleep, as though being conscious were an option they had simply decided to opt out of temporarily. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded his jacket into a pillow and placed it gently under her head, and he sat beside her in the June afternoon, beside the sunken garden and the jasmine and Kevin in his clay pot, and he was quiet in a way that was entirely different from the quiet of 3 years of grief. This was the other kind, the full kind. When Maria appeared at the corner of the hedge a few minutes later, she found him sitting in the grass beside her sleeping daughter, his long legs stretched out in front of him, looking at the garden with an expression she had not seen on his face before. She did not have a word for it exactly, in English or in Spanish, though both languages had been trying to name it for centuries. The closest she could get, writing in her journal that night, was this: "He looked like someone who had come home." And perhaps that was exactly what had happened. Not to a place he had always lived here, but to himself. Back to the version of himself that could sit still, that could wait for things to bloom, that could receive, without deflecting, the love that small hands offered across the edge of a hole in the ground. The garden grew. The jasmine climbed. The bees made their rounds. Kevin watched over it all. And in the southeast corner of the Hargrove estate, where a man had once dug alone in the dark, something had taken root that had no name in any language, but that every human heart, given time and a little soil and the right 3-year-old, somehow already knows.